I would like to ask the Minister for Health and Social Care, further to his answer to question 47 in September, who asked his department not to stockpile medical devices and clinical consumables, and on what basis he has decided to place reliance on their reassurances.
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr President. The Secretary of State for Health and Social Care in the United Kingdom, the Right Honourable Matt Hancock MP, issued direct instructions in December 2018 to UK organisations. Those instructions still remain in place, that no hospitals, care homes or community pharmacies should stockpile medicines, clinical consumables or devices. The ordering patterns of medicines are being monitored by suppliers in order to prevent stockpiling. In the advice from the UK, it was also stated that local stockpiling could cause critical shortages and place patients at risk, actually having the opposite effect of what was intended, and that's a sentiment I actually concur with. The UK government has worked with pharmaceutical manufacturing companies to obtain assurances that they will produce and hold 6 weeks of stock on top of what they consider their normal buffer. In addition, the UK government has provided certain wholesale dealers with extra storage capacity to hold that increased stock. We have received assurances that the Isle of Man will receive equal priority for stock of that of any UK area, including clinical commissioning groups. In the document EU Exit Operational Readiness Guidance, published in December 2018, the Right Honourable Secretary of State has provided direct assurances that the Crown dependencies will receive the same protection as health systems within the UK in respect of continuation and access of supplies.
Supplementary, Mr Hooper.
Thank you very much, Mr President. It seems to me that we're placing a lot of faith in the UK here, which could be an enormous risk to take. It's interesting that the Minister has said that they've been advised not to stockpile. That's only in respect of medicinal supplies. It seems like, according to his answer in September at least, the Department is increasing its stock levels of medicines at Nobles Hospital. So it's unusual to see they're increasing a stockpile of medicines but not of consumables. So I'd like the Minister to clarify that. My original question asked about on what basis is he placing reliance on those assurances. He's mentioned a number of times that we've been given assurances by the UK, assurances by the Secretary of State. I submit to the Minister that assurances will be worth absolutely nothing the day after a no-deal Brexit. What has he got that actually makes something, ties them down to make sure that we are treated the same as the UK and we aren't suddenly left out on a limb?
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr President. Well, in terms of the assurances, they are assurances in the event of a no-deal Brexit, so they're deliberately designed for a no-deal Brexit taking place. I'm actually down in Westminster tomorrow, Mr President, to hold further conversations, and I will again be reinforcing the point, but we have written assurances that we will be treated no different to any clinical commissioning group in the UK. They are reassurances that I personally think we can rely on. I would actually like to put on record here and now, Mr President, my thanks to the UK government for the way they have actually engaged with us over this. I think they have engaged very positively. They have answered our questions, they have been involved with us, and they have been willing to put those assurances in writing as well. So we do actually have them on paper. In terms of stockpiling, even if we wish to stockpile, Mr President, we couldn't do so because, as I say, the instruction from the UK is in relation to their supply chain. The actual suppliers are monitoring, and that includes stuff coming into the Isle of Man, how much we are doing. And if there is evidence of stockpiling, the suppliers themselves will cut it off to stop it happening, because it could affect the ability of other places to be able to access supplies. I do need to emphasise again, Mr President, as the Chief Minister has emphasised in his first answer, that this is a worst-case scenario planning. This is what it's all about. In terms of being an island as well, we do have to recognise that we do hold more stock than UK hospitals would, generally because we have variances of weather and so on, so we build in a much higher contingency than UK hospitals, whereas a lot of their medication is just in time. Because we are an island, we can't just pop down to a hospital down the road and get more stock. We already hold a much more substantive buffer, both in terms of clinical devices and medication, than you would actually find within a UK organisation.
Honourable Member for Onchan, Miss Edge.
Thank you, Mr President. Just wonder if the Minister could just confirm, could he have gone it alone and decided what was right for the people of the island? And also, he stated that the suppliers would cut off if we tried to stockpile. Who is our contract with? Is it with the UK government? Is it with the suppliers? What was the Minister, he quite clearly just said that. Can the Minister reassure me that he has done everything he can to ensure that the people on the island have got the protection and the supplies that they need?
Reply, sir.
Mr. President, unless we're going to start manufacturing our own medical supplies, we're not quite sure how we can go it alone. We have supply lines and supply routes. The UK is fully entitled, as any sovereign state is, to issue instructions to organisations within their remit, and we use NHS supply chain. Not everything comes through the UK, and there's other plans in place for those other supply routes, but those that come through the UK, where the supply chain is in the UK Secretary of State is able to issue those instructions, and we need to take light of that and plan accordingly.
Honourable Member for Onchan, Mr Callister.
Thank you, Mr President. I thank the Minister for his statements and his replies this morning. But just looking at Yellowhammer document section 6, it does say that, in relation to stockpiling, that they can be achieved. However, it does say, in respect, it may not be possible with short shelf lives of certain medications. So the question is to the ministers, is what the island's doing, or can you give reassurance that the medication that has a short life, that we will still have access to those going into the future?
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr President. Very timely question from the Honourable Member for Onchan. Yes, there are certain medicines that in any scenario you can't actually stockpile because they're temperature controlled or they're short life. In relation to those, there are plans in place to keep the supply chain going. We have also issued instructions to pharmacies that if there is, which I'll be moving on to a question later on this, Mr President, that if there is individual patients that require particular unusual brands of medication, perhaps is the way to put it, then the pharmacy should be planning for that in advance. In relation to section 6 of the Yellowhammer document, there is obviously mention about reduction, but as I say, the advice from DHSC is not to stockpile, and I concur with that because stockpiling can cause its own problems.
Honourable Member Mr Hooper.
Thank you, Mr President. I think it is important, actually, as the Minister has done, to emphasise that this is a reasonable worst-case assumption. That needs to be made very clear. My final supplementary to the Minister on this point is, in the event of this worst-case scenario happening, can he provide this Honourable Court with an absolute assurance that whilst it may take longer for people to acquire medicinal supplies, they will still be able to acquire them, and no one on the Isle of Man will be left unable to obtain life-saving medicines and supplies that they need?
Sir Ashford.
Thank you, Mr President. The whole purpose of this is to mitigate exactly that. The Brexit Impact Group that the Department has is actually meeting weekly in the event of a no deal and Operation Yellowhammer having to come into force. The Brexit Impact Group will actually meet daily. They will actually assess across the entire board of all devices, all medicines, and they will have a daily update to us in DHSC for 11 a.m. each day in the event with a RAG rating on all different types of medicines. So if there is anything where we suddenly come across a vulnerability, it can be tackled same day. And obviously we are working with our partners in the UK to ensure that the supply chains are as robust as possible. But I do need to emphasise again, Mr President, we are again in a different situation from the UK because being an island, the buffer that we hold is an awful lot higher than it is across the water.
Honourable Member Mrs Beecroft.
Thank you, Mr President. I have no reason to doubt at all the intention and the good intention of the written assurances. Could the Minister provide us with some comfort on that? I mean, have they been checked, for example, by the Attorney General's Chamber to ensure that the written assurances are in fact legally binding?
Minister.
Mr President, to be perfectly honest, I mean, assurances are just that, they're assurances. I don't think the Isle of Man can bind the legal hands of any other government, but I have to say I have seen the assurances, I have spoken with the politicians involved. I met with James Duddridge when he came over to the island, who is the minister, one of the ministers in the exiting EU department, and they are genuine in the fact that they see the Crown dependencies as part of their planning. And those assurances are firm. We have them in writing, Mr President, and I don't think I can go further than that.
Honourable Member Miss Edge.
Thank you, Mr President. Just in response to my previous question to the Minister, he said, I'm not sure how we could as an island produce our own. I think I need to make it a little bit clearer perhaps. Can the Minister advise when we became in a contract with the NHS for all of our supplies? how recent that was, and prior to that, how did we purchase all of our medication and supplies? Is the supply chain recently come in for what I would class as non-medical supplies, as in medication? Not the medication, apologies. So can you just confirm when that actually came in?
Rashford.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll try and keep it as brief as possible. As far as I'm aware, the island has always, as long as I think we've got a health service in place, source most of our supplies from the UK because of the convenience of the routes. In terms of NHS supply chain, if I remember rightly, although I do stand to be corrected on this because I am doing it off the top of my head, I think it was the Blair government that centralised everything into what's now classed as the NHS supply chain. We don't get everything from the UK. There are other things that come from outside of the UK, which, as I say, we've got separate contingency planning for. But the UK is our nearest neighbour. We effectively have free trade between them. It would be rather crazy for us as an island in the middle of the Irish Sea to start trying to bring in medical supplies from all over the world when we've got a neighbour across the water that can supply them quite freely.